Morning. God, you guys sound like you're totally burnt. How late were you out? It's Vegas. You should have been out late. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking at all. I'm going to bring up our three panelists, and we're going to talk about partnering, not just partnering with GoDaddy or big companies, but just partnering in general. What are some of the fundamentals, benefits of partnering? What are some of the issues with partnering? You know, we all kind of want to work with other companies, but we sort of have this sense that if I work really closely with a company and I open myself up, I'm vulnerable, maybe my business is vulnerable, or people really aligned with me. And we're going to discuss that. So I'm going to bring up three learned, scholared panelists. And gentlemen, come up and take a seat, and I'll just go through them. First, we have Das Kamhout. Das is a senior principal engineer in the Intel data center group. In his career at Intel, he's been one of the key leaders. Hey.
Thanks, Blake. How you doing?
Good. In his career at Intel, he's been one of the key leaders in the software-defined infrastructure, SDI, as you know it, engineering and industry efforts. He brings many years of experience as the engineer and architect, leader for the Intel IT cloud efforts, as well as an extensive experience running the software architecture and infrastructure for large shit. This is long.
It's pretty long. Yeah, just stop.
Yeah.
That's good.
Anyway, quite a guy. Next, Raghu Murthi. Raghu is works at GoDaddy. He oversees all of our hosting services, both at GoDaddy and also Media Temple as well.
Yep.
And builds a ton of software. I've worked with Raghu over the last 20 years, going back to Compaq and Microsoft and a couple of other companies, so know him well. And then we have Jonathan Bryce, who is executive director at the OpenStack Foundation. We are a huge OpenStack shop. Thank you for all your efforts, and thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Das,
Okay.
and we'll pass this all the way down, so all three of you get a chance to answer this. But are there differences or benefits in partnering with large, small, or medium-sized companies? And do you feel, when you partner with a company of a different size, are there different characteristics, and how do you have to treat them to be successful? You being successful and your partner being successful.
Yeah, so there's definitely a difference. So Intel, we're one of the smaller companies. So definitely there's a way you relate with us. No, but seriously. So one thing I do a lot is try to work with a lot of smaller companies, and smaller companies that are disruptive. So I think if you're small size, you're kind of willing to you go fast, take some massive risks, and that can be really, really exciting to come from a large company and be able to partner with somebody that's really pushing the envelope and trying to do new things. So definitely a huge difference than that. So if you are a small company, definitely be a disruptor and definitely push the envelope. On the larger company size, it's probably usually more challenging. There's more politics involved. You have to know what exactly everybody's motive is, and what their strategy is, and why they're basically seeking a partnership. So it becomes more complex with a larger size.
How do you choose between, I want to go get 10 little guys that are disruptive versus a couple of really big players that could be maybe bigger needle movers?
So from an Intel perspective, we actually always had to do both. So for us, we need a massive bulk of large companies that will move an industry together. So we partner, if it's in football, we definitely partner with NFL in a major space, but if it's tech, get with Google or Microsoft or someone giant to really push something a certain way, but then always trying to seek the smaller shops to really change everybody's dynamic.
Yeah, interesting. Raghu, same question.
Yeah, so I think there are base characteristics for whether you're a small company or a large company working on a partnerships, right? You always need to look for a win-win situation. Once you get to a point where you can see the win-win, then there are different characteristics for working with a large company versus a small company. With a large company, you need to really work, there's a lot of politics, as Das mentioned, but we need to really think through, are we pushing the technology forward? Are we pushing a business forward, an ecosystem forward? And so those kind of different characteristics actually help in making the partnership with the large company. With the smaller ones, I think the key point there is how fast can you go? And the faster that you can have a win-win situation with a smaller company and keep moving really fast, that can actually blossom and bring bigger companies into the fray. So I think it's both fast with the smaller ones and then really think through with the bigger ones.
So when you have a little company that's doing something very unique and you see it and you go, oh, that looks like a really interesting value proposition that they've caught on to, how do you make sure that you don't eat their lunch? Because I've seen it happen. I've seen, just use Microsoft as an example, see something really interesting, partners with a company, small company, and the next thing you know, it's a feature in a product.
Yeah.
So how do you solve for that?
Well, go ahead.
Well, acquisition versus giving them enough funds to make it so they don't have to worry about a lot of the marketing efforts or the politics the larger companies have to do. So I think giving them enough to help push them along, whether it's doing joint engineering with them, but something that doesn't change their direction too much, because often that's what I get excited by, is finding that company with a couple people in it that are really changing it. So you don't want to change their direction, and often it's good to acquire companies at times, but if you're really looking for a partnership and watch them grow, it's just how to help them enough, either financially or with some air cover to allow them to follow their dreams.
Cool.
I think one point to make on that as well is it's not just a matter necessarily of taking sort of their bread and butter and turning it into a feature in a big company product. Sometimes small companies get into a partnership with a larger company, and just the gap in resources is enough to swamp what the small company can do and how they can make progress. And I've been in small companies before where this has happened, and we've done a partnership. And to the big company, putting 3 or 4 people on a project full time isn't necessarily that massive of an investment. But for our company, it was a huge investment, and it ended up taking us off course on other initiatives and other things that we had in place. So I think that it's really about being aware of what they are capable of doing. Do they have a vision that you think is going to be valuable over the long term that you want to support, or is it more of kind of an opportunistic thing that you want to just kind of in a low risk way keep playing in a space? But I do think that beyond just replacing their product or replacing their service, you have to think about the demands that you're putting on the time of smaller companies.
On the company itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I've worked with a lot of startups also on the side, and when a big company comes in and says, hey, we want to go in this direction, and they say, we'll put resources or money in, I think the key point there for the smaller company to think through is this the same direction that you want to go versus where the big company wants to go? And then also the smaller company to think through, how can they survive the partnership if it goes bad?
Yeah.
And that's something that they ought to think through before they enter the partnership with the large company.
Right. Jonathan, you are basically in the partnering business, really.
And now,
Right now. OpenStack is virtually, I think, part of almost every, worthwhile stack that's running, that's wide open and available to everybody that's here. How do you choose? Do you have to choose, or are you just open for everybody?
It's for us, we try to maintain a balance. We're a nonprofit, and we have about 700 companies that are part of our ecosystem and that we deal with. And for us, the large companies bring a level of stability and long-term strategic investment. The startups bring a level of energy and speed and all the things that we were talking about. And so we focus a lot on how do we keep that balance, and we do things that are meant to create value for both sides, but also a level playing field. For instance, at our events, we have pretty strict specifications around what vendor presence looks like, whether you're large or small, so that no one can come in, Intel can't
swamp you.
Yeah, or Microsoft, can't come in and buy out half of the show floor and dominate everybody else when you have a startup there that may be doing something really valuable and really innovative, but doesn't have anywhere near the budget. And so, since we're a nonprofit, our motivations are slightly different, but we do work very hard to try to keep that kind of balance in the ecosystem. And I think that one of the really interesting things that we see when we do that is we create a space where people collaborate together and they all take value out. And that's something that's a really interesting part to to my job now that I didn't have when I was just kind of in the commercial world before.
And they do a really good job at it. So like, I hate like some conferences you go to and the headliners have this 45-minute slot where they just blab about their product line. And so they've done great, like limit it to 8 minutes or something, but just like real short, but then a startup or somebody else with a great idea can come and have a stage to really tell a story, which is a nice dynamic. So they're actually doing it.
How's the contribution model work in OpenStack?
So the contribution model for OpenStack is very open, but we have kind of different governance pieces to the technical side and then also to the business side. And one of the things that people are always concerned about, I think, with open source projects is there going to be one company that really comes in and dominates it. And that's something that we can't necessarily dictate exactly who's going to contribute to what code base, but we try to make sure that if there are, for instance, users that are betting their businesses on OpenStack, we want to make sure that those companies are involved in the contribution and the development process. And as we go out and proactively engage them, we end up with a pretty balanced model. So we have, fully loaded open source companies like Red Hat and SUSE that provide between 50 and 60% of the code, and then the rest of it comes from a very wide range of other companies. And those, we monitor a bunch of metrics and try to manage that balance.
Very well, I think. Co-opetition is something I think that we all end up dealing with in our businesses. When you are dancing with a partner that also competes with you, how do you avoid stepping on each other's feet?
Part of it's again, if it's a larger company or even an underdog or an overdog, just understanding motivation. So if you're really partnering on a technology and the goal is to push that technology forward, you usually want to find is there a specific feature. So the nice thing about the open source space is we can go in with somebody that's completely competitive, but actually agree on a feature and a concept about the technology, and then drive that forward. So that's the easiest way, is when it's out in the open in code. If it's something different that's maybe not open, it can be much more difficult. Say a standards body. If you're familiar with standards body, it's basically a lot of PhDs that pontificate for 4 or 5 years and argue, and sometimes it's useful. But I'd say the best co-opetition that's happening. I'm a huge fan. Anything that takes 5 years to get to nowhere is great. So open source is cool because it actually you can have the same concept as standards, but it talk through code and that's probably one of my favorite ways for co-opetition.
What about you, Raghu?
I think having the organizations like nonprofit organization or even standards organizations is really good in the sense that the goal is very clear, right? We want to actually grow the business. And if you all keep the eyes on growing the business, then co-opetition becomes a lot easier to manage. If you're thinking that the business is not growing, then the co-opetition becomes one-sided. So we got to make sure that the whole ecosystem is growing, and then it becomes a lot easier for us to work together. And I've been on USB and ESA and NISA. And
okay, some standards work.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think Raghu makes a really good point, which is that the model for competition really depends on the state of the market that you're playing in. Because early on, when markets are growing really quickly, there's tons of opportunity for everybody, and it's really easy to get along with people that you might be competing with when your sales are all going up and you're all making lots of money. But then as it starts to flatten out or turn, I think that's when one thing that I think a word that we haven't said yet that really is key to all partnerships of any kind, that's when the relationships really start to matter. And the old partnering saying, people over paper. Like that's when you get to that point, that's when it's important that you've invested the time to really build relationships so that you can sit down and work through the difficult choices that you're going to have to make about, are you going to continue this? Are you going to be able to find ways to work together? Are you going to need to dissolve that, or what happens at that point?
So when people over paper, okay, what happens when shit goes wrong? So because inevitably, it does. Either the relationship sours, your business goals start to overlap a little bit. You have to unwind some of the things that you've done. How do you do it? Have you had to do it? Any of you can answer.
Yeah, no, I'm not had to do it, but I think from a situation perspective that I can imagine is when things have to be unwound, the best thing to do is be upfront about it and say, we're going to unwind this, and let's go our different ways, and just do it, in a very clean, almost surgical fashion, and say, we're going to cut this off, right? And just do that. And I think that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, the ecosystem gets really messy. And there's not only confusion between you and your partner, there's confusion on how the other people in the ecosystem actually have to behave, right? And that becomes a big challenge.
Yeah, I think the upfront piece of it is so important. The worst way to find out that a partnership is going south is when you read it in their quarterly filing, which has happened to me. And and in that case, I look back and I'm like, well, I wasn't spending enough time on that relationship to see. Exactly. I should have seen this was coming. Yeah. But also from their point, I think that it would have been the right thing for them to give a heads up the other way. And so whichever side you're on, the relationship matters. But if you know you're driving towards something, I think you really need to be upfront about it. And at the end of the day, our industries are all too small to burn bridges. And
right.
It's important to keep that in mind, that this person that you might be severing a partnership with today, you may be at a company together down the road in a couple of years, and those kinds of things you don't necessarily forget.
Yeah, don't burn any bridges, basically. Yeah.
It's good. The people versus paper. So definitely, I think at least for Intel, it can be hard. There's so many different technologies that are competing, and we like to definitely sponsor and fund the ones that are going to be super successful. But in each one of these little technical or large technical communities, they often fight between each other. So how to build bridges too that can be lasting. I mean, there's still, I don't know if CloudStack's still running, but it's somewhere. But like Mesos versus Kubernetes, these things still exist as little wars between folks. So how to keep everybody moving forward and let the technology keep going. Often it's people and tech, and paper gets in the way.
So do you bring attorneys into the room? Do you leave the attorneys out of the room? You guys won't even answer that shit.
Yeah, paper.
Yeah, I mean, eventually you got to paper it. Yeah. I've always thought that, look, if you write a nice, real crisp LOI that just spells out intent, you trade it back and forth without any attorney touching it, say, this is what we wanted to capture, then you hand it to them and say, okay, don't screw this up. Yeah. This is a relationship. It's going to have to be a relationship, and then let them kind of work on it.
Yeah. The only times that I've used attorneys is when we do an acquisition. So that's.
Oh yeah. You got to cover that a little bit.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
How many attorneys in the room? Wait, one.
One. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that.
Did you bring business cards?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think your approach there is a good one, because again it gets back to a relationship, and if you try to start every friendship with a legal agreement, I mean, other than attorneys, you might not make very many friends. Yeah. And so I think that yes, agreeing up front on those basic points, and then making sure that the paperwork doesn't get in the way or get too overwhelming is important. And I also think that again, just when it comes down to it, of course there have been some huge blow-ups that have turned into massive legal battles. But a lot of these partnerships, when they go wrong, you're never going to do that, because it's too much of a headache, too much cost, too much opportunity cost, and so it's you don't blow it up at the beginning when you're never going to use it at the end anyway.
Absolutely. So here's a weird one for you. Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, the giant sucking sound of three giant infrastructures, pouring $10 billion of CapEx a year, not collectively, individually, into these pieces of infrastructure. Is that helpful for the industry, or is that something that is going to just consolidate everybody?
Well,
Intel is
I know
right in the middle of all of them.
So I look at it a few ways. First and foremost is that they've really pushed the envelope of tech. Amazon, with EC2 and S3, OpenStack originally was hey, how do I mimic that in such a way that I can have an API? So even Jeff Bezos' rant, if anybody read it from like 2005, where he said basically you'll get fired if you don't write an API.
Yep.
So these are like certain things that happened in the industry that really pushed what's possible, and it caused a whole new effect on what people built and what they created. So much of our industry is based on the fact that these APIs became available, this capacity became available. Google is pushing tech like people have not pushed tech in a long time. What they're doing on the networking side, what they're doing with analytics, and they have DeepMind, their artificial intelligence, looking at the power of their data centers now and making decisions real time that humans could have never made. So, I look to them aspirationally and say they're really pushing the envelope of what's possible. Now, Microsoft's actually doing similar things too. Now, on the sucking sound though, yeah, it's possible to have three that take over, but even James Hamilton, he's one of the distinguished engineers at Amazon, and says there's no way the three of them will have enough points of presence in the world to handle everything that we as humans and devices are going to require from back-end capacity. So I'd say, they're pushing the envelope. We can all learn from what they're doing. My team, we just basically help others mimic some of the concepts that they're doing, and then I think we just push the whole industry forward. So, but everybody needs to be scrappy and push for their space and differentiate. Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with Doss that they have pushed the industry, and that has added a lot of value to a lot of other industries as well. And I think it's shown it's shown people a different way of thinking about infrastructure. And what that has actually done is created a greater demand for infrastructure than has ever existed before. And it's the growth of it is unbelievable. You were talking about the global perspective, and OpenStack is a global community, and one of the things that I get to do that's really fascinating is to travel a lot. I've been to 15 countries since May for different OpenStack events. And when you when you go around, what you realize very quickly is that 3 companies, 5 companies, 10 companies are never going to be able to meet the demand for infrastructure. I was in China a couple of times this summer, and you look at the companies in China. One of the OpenStack users there is the State Grid of China, which is the largest power company in the world. They have 1.2 million employees. And
what?
Yes. And they run dozens of data centers. There's another company in China that just built out 500 acres of data centers. And they are running infrastructure, like true infrastructure in China, the trains, the electricity, the water. You can't just throw that in a data center somewhere else in the world. Right. And on, so many use cases. But I think that the other thing that I'm starting to see is a realization that the big cloud providers are awesome because they provide a very quick way to get started. They provide a lot of capabilities, but over the long term, if you understand your workloads as a company, it's one of the most expensive ways to get access to servers. And people are starting to see that and look at other alternatives, whether it's other providers or mixtures of private clouds or private infrastructure with different resources. So I think that they've done an awesome job in leading the way technically, but I think that the demand is just too great for a handful of people to fill it, and the variety of use cases just continues to expand.
I think we've got to recognize that the 3 guys have actually raised the level of innovation in our industry to a great extent, right? Whether it is software or the infrastructure or the hardware itself, right? I think they're doing a tremendous job. And they're creating a drag effect that other infrastructure vendors are going to come in and actually go behind them to go drive and build bigger data centers and infrastructure. So I think it's a great news for Intel and probably OpenStack. And I think it's fantastic that they're able to build the compute power, the networking power, and the memory power. I think the biggest demands for over the next 10 years is probably going to be memory, right? And it's amazing what they are doing and dragging the entire industry along with us.
Yeah, I agree. I know that I've had conversations with investors who will say, well, I don't know if GoDaddy, you guys are going to be able to, continue to survive with the big three that I just mentioned, because they could serve your customer as well. And I think it's the same for everybody else in this room, is because we actually serve a very specific workload for a very tiny customer, it's more likely that we become a customer of one of those companies than they come after our customers.
Right.
And I think that hasn't dawned on folks.
Yeah, no, I think, Blake, the point that you're making is that for people who are servicing specific customer workloads and things like that,
right,
or specific customer bases, the big three cannot service everybody, and they cannot have every workload that they can imagine. So if you're servicing a specific customer base and a specific workload, you're likely to become a customer of one of the big three, rather than they servicing your customer base.
So if somebody wants to partner with you, Jonathan, what are the steps?
There are a lot of different ways that you can get involved. Step one is email me, jonathan@openstack.org. Now, it depends on what you want to do with OpenStack. If you want to help drive the software forward, then there are a lot of different ways to get involved in the community, but that it all basically happens online and in different online forums. If you're building a business around OpenStack, then we actually have a biz dev team that works with hundreds of companies in different industries to help you figure out what kinds of products you might want to launch, and we help promote the companies who do that. And then we also have a lot of big users like eBay and who run massive data centers, or some of the companies in China that I was talking about that want to be very involved in the community because they're spending a lot of effort to retool how they run their business internally. And so we work very closely with them to, in some cases, help them build better relationships across different technology components, whether it's hardware vendors or software vendors. So a lot of different ways, but it all comes in through a very small team at the OpenStack Foundation, about 15 of us. So it's
total.
Yeah.
So we're pretty easy to work with.
Well, how many guys can you onboard at a time?
We do probably about 20 or 25 a month.
Engagements.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Das, same question for you.
Yeah, so it depends. So we don't actually do a lot of direct sales, a lot of companies, but I'd say one way is if you're a customer of Intel's, which a lot of people are, depending on what field you're in, whether it's cloud service provider, or you're a comms provider, or you're enterprise or government, it's understanding, do we have joint engineering we want to do? So we basically look at, is there joint engineering? Is there joint marketing what we want to do? Or in some scenarios, there's our Intel Capital's fairly large group. So really looking at those three angles. My team specifically mostly is on the joint engineering side. So we go in and understand, do we have a mutual problem that we want to address, and then how can we go solve that? So that's my primary focus, but pretty much.
So for the folks in the room, would they just walk up to you and
just
start
send me
talking?
an email.
What's your email?
DAS@Intel. Easy.
That's easy. Raghu, same question for GoDaddy.
Yeah, I think it depends on which area in GoDaddy that you want to work with. There's multiple groups within GoDaddy. And the easiest way, if you want to form a relationship with GoDaddy, is we have a biz dev group. That's also a very key group within GoDaddy that you can contact and work through. Or if you know the leaders of each different groups, if you want to talk to hosting, that's me. And my email is pretty straightforward, raghu.m@godaddy.com. So easy to get hold of.
Are there signals that you can read whether a partnership is going to be good or bad? Can you tell early? Like, how would these folks know that, this is one I shouldn't get into at all, or this is starting to feel a little funny?
It depends on what you're trying to get out of the partnership. I'd say if it's a technical partnership, is there similar technical competence on both sides? So even if I'm working with a small company, it's often that they have some very great technical folks that have done something amazing. So as long as there's mutual technical respect and competence, I think you can find that it's going to be good. If it's fake, usually I can detect that pretty quickly and decide it's
So a
not.
finely tuned bullshit detector is important.
Yeah, finely tuned bullshit detector.
Okay.
If it comes across just as a sales pitch, it's problematic. If lawyers are in the room in the start, that's problematic. There's at least two.
I was going to say that for me, it's similar to what Das is saying. You know, it's who you're talking to on the other side, but also one of the things that I pick up on sometimes is how you're getting shifted around. You know, do you start out with somebody that seems like very much in line with what you want, and then get shuffled off to somebody else and down the line, and you know,
seeing yourself deprioritized over time? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Or even just different, you know, because then it means that, especially with a larger company, they don't know where you fit, and so that's what it's going to be like through the whole partnership. They're going to constantly be handing you around, and you're probably not going to be able to make a lot of traction. But I think that's one of the signs that sometimes comes out.
Yeah, from my perspective, you know, if you can't define two things, one is what is a good win-win between you and the partner, and the second one is if you don't understand where you are within the priority list of what the partner is actually executing on, if it's very low in the priority list for the partner and it's really urgent for you, there's a mismatch, and you never get traction, right? And especially in larger companies, if it's really low priority, you're not going to get any resources on it.
And it doesn't matter how big your company is, everybody's resource constrained.
Yeah, everybody's
right?
resource
You can't
constrained.
take on everything. So
Exactly.
how do you prioritize that?
Exactly. So you got to make sure that as a partner that you understand where it is in the priority list of your partner. And if it's really high and you have a win-win, then you got a good chance that the partnership will work.
Yep.
Do you think that you can shift your place in the priority list?
Yeah, you can if the value proposition and the win-win is big enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if there's this going on. Peeling off Benjamin's, I think. Tends to get you higher up on the list, too.
Yeah, but hopefully it's agreed on. And two, I think with the prioritization or who you're talking to, even it's like small things. Do you have each other's cell phone number? Like,
seriously?
can you? That's like just like a basic thing that people don't think of.
So why don't you guys just give your cell phone numbers out?
That's after.
Get the email thing going.
It's like, is there a win-win? Okay, let's make sure we can talk to each other quickly.
So we agreed we're going to do some audience questions. So are there mics floating around out there?
How can you tell when you're trying to handle too many partnerships at the same time? Many of your questions have bolted down to, you've got to be paying a lot of attention to this partnership, and you've got to be paying attention to that one. How do you know when you're getting too stretched at that?
Easy one is your calendar.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go back to the anecdote that I was referring to earlier, which is if you're getting surprised, then you're probably not you don't have the bandwidth to stay on top of them the way you should. That's probably a sign that you've definitely got too many.
Yeah, from my perspective, if you have too many partners, then your priority list is going to get scrambled all over the place, and then you're not paying attention to any of the partners, so you'll never make progress on the objectives of the partnership. So you'll know very quickly that you're not making any progress. Then you got to really think who's your priority list of your partners, and then work towards that. That's the easiest way.
Yeah, and beyond the calendar. So actually, a fairly systematic way. We have a technical architecture representative data center. So if I'm dealing with technical companies, I usually try to deal with no more than 2 or 3 for each major area. You may have some outliers that are interesting to keep tabs on, but from a partnership, it's two, and this could be like 2 or 3 tech things. So there might be more companies behind each of those 2 or 3.
A bigger marketing. You can have,
exactly.
Different set of resources. Other question? Yes, sir.
It moved me. What's the pros and cons of an exclusive partnership? I don't think you really talked about that. So a big company comes to you and says, hey, we want to sell your stuff, but we want to be exclusive with you.
That's a great question.
Well, the benefit is it's something that's so rare. Nobody has it. Nobody will. And you're the 2 people that can deliver that and create a market that nobody else will be in for years. So I'd say that's fairly rare these days, but it definitely happens.
But as a small company, if you're being asked for an exclusive partnership, you should take a second look and make sure that you understand it first. Because in one perspective, becoming an exclusive partner, your fate is tied into the bigger company's hands, if it's a bigger company. And you got to make sure that the priority list, again, is well understood and things like that. Sometimes larger companies enter into exclusive agreements with smaller companies, and then it falls off the priority list, and the smaller companies' hands are tied. And that becomes pretty bad for the smaller company. So, when a larger company asks for an exclusive partnership, take a second look and make sure that you're doing it with your eyes open.
Yeah, make sure it's time-based,
Yeah.
not so long that it created you.
Yeah, exactly.
With a big company and a little company, there's no such thing as mutually assured self-destruction.
Yeah.
You are going to implode way before the big company
exactly.
implodes. And then there's this other two very important words: carve out. Make sure you know exactly what you are carving in and carving out, so you have a really clear out. And it's actually when you're dealing with when you're a small company dealing with a deal with a big company, bring the attorneys in just a little earlier than you might otherwise.
Here?
Got
Yes?
back.
Yeah.
So what happens when your partner gets acquired by your competitor?
Oh, by your company?
By your competitor.
By your competitor.
You've established a partnership, and your partner gets acquired by your competitor. What do you
Hopefully
do
you
with
had
that
lawyers
partnership?
involved originally. There's actually a clause for that. Well, a few ways, but seriously, if you're doing a deep partnership, especially if there's financials involved, there's usually a clause to make sure if they're acquired by a competitor, you can back out of everything.
Yeah, or either there's a clause for backing out, or there's a clause that you can actually invoke for strengthening your partnership with the larger company, and there might be an exit for you there. So.
And it could lead to co-opetition, though. So I mean, there's so many options. If it's an open source space, obviously you can still work it out and move to a co-opetition space.
So we talk a lot about relationship versus paper. Yeah. Sometimes paper's more important than the relationship, which in that case particularly matters a lot. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
What's the most valuable lesson you ever learned in a partnership that failed?
In a partnership that failed.
Probably the most valuable lesson that I've learned in a partnership that has failed is making sure that, at least from my perspective, I've worked in the larger companies, so it didn't impact us as much from a partnership perspective. But when I saw the impact on the smaller companies, the most valuable lesson that I learned is the next time I did a partnership with a smaller company, I actually made sure that I understood my priorities when I was doing the partnership with them, to make sure that I was not tying them down. So that to me was the most valuable lesson that I learned, because I've seen too many companies get destroyed when they have a partnership and then it fails, and I think that's not a good thing.
Are you a small company or a big company?
Small company.
Yeah.
Small company.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what I was thinking, which is that I think the lesson is just that partnerships are rarely equal in their potential,
Impact.
rewards or consequences in failure, and in a lot of cases it is the smaller companies that it has a bigger impact on, just because they can't absorb as much distraction, cost.
Yep.
Loss of market, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think that just really understanding what the mismatch is and how that could potentially impact you.
Yeah, I'd say for me it's stay true to your personal technical integrity, if that's what drives you. Relationships can go sour between companies, but how to try to maintain still. If you had a good connection technically with a company that you want to create a partnership, how can you maintain that even if the financial and paper aspects go sour? So I've definitely seen a few of those, and just try to keep the technical integrity moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess I'd build on that. make sure you understand the stakeholder hierarchy in the company that you're dealing with. So if you're a little company and you're dealing with a big company, and you know who's championing your deal or is really passionate about it, make sure they have the position power to actually execute. Because if they have to go to somebody else and say, hey, and they haven't pitched it internally, because you're never going to see what's going on inside that big company. If you're a small company, you're not going to know what the politics are. You got to get as close to the politics as you possibly can beyond the technical goodness, which I think is very important. I think getting engineers on your side, but getting those folks that are going to say, investment approved as high up as you can possibly go, if in fact that's the way that the approval model is in the company, if it's not distributed. So each one of these companies is actually trying to lock us in. Right? So whether it's the difference between Spanner and another database solution, or it's Kubernetes versus a container model that is proprietary.
Have you seen the truck that goes one way to AWS data centers, for instance?
They never come out.
They don't come out, yeah.
Somebody could be working on inner trucks between companies.
It is pretty trippy, though. I mean, do you think that it's going to be possible to actually write an abstraction layer that will allow you to take your code and extract it from the prescription that these companies are trying to use to lock you in? Because that is in fact happening.
I don't think so. But maybe there is. So I'd say so I used to do engineering operations for Intel IT, and our goal always was we minimize or lower switching costs, rather than stop lock-in. So it's about lowering switching costs. So we built our own shim layers, and we still have some today for, say, certain storage vendors that are unwilling to have layers in between them. But then things like OpenStack came out with Cinder that changed that. So I think there's been layers of abstractions been possible. But what really is intense about the walled gardens that are happening now is beyond like Spanner, RDS from Amazon's probably their fastest growing technology, and there really isn't anything yet, and it's been around for a while, that can do anything close to what it does from a consumption as well as running perspective. Now what's even wilder is what's happening with serverless computing or function as a service, which goes all the way down to your device. That layer of APIs that Microsoft, Amazon, and Google are doing are just so far ahead right now. So in Intel IT, we'd say, can we say 6 to 12 months behind? It seems like more about 3 to 4 years. So I would love to see services that are open at that layer, but we just haven't been moving fast enough.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is I definitely believe in the market as a driver for a lot of these things. And right now, what the big three are doing so well is they're integrating all of these capabilities together. Yeah. It's like Das said, you can actually get a lot of the functionality, maybe not all the way there, but probably close enough for what you need to do for 98% of the companies out there. Right. But it's so much harder to integrate it and to get that experience. And that, to me, right now is where they are killing everyone else.
Yeah, the stacks are pretty well developed.
Yeah, and so I think that's what we actually need to focus on in the broader industry and in open source technology is how do we make the innovation that's happening in the open actually work better together.
Yeah, and build off each other.
Yeah,
it has to build off each other. It can't
exactly.
just be little silos of tech.
Yep, agreed.
Well, but even if you build a shim layer and things like that, and you can adapt it for all the three and manage it so that you can be agnostic a little bit. The problem comes when you go to test it and make sure that you can scale it and be efficient with using the resources. You're going to fail, right? Because you can't test on all three at the same time. You can't release products on the same time. It's not going to be as efficient as all three, right? So companies who are going to go to the cloud will have to end up at some point choosing one and going and driving that, right? Being abstracted out is going to be very, very difficult. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's why we think OpenStack is a good, safe bet for us from an abstraction perspective, and we can actually go drive that. But it's from an efficiency perspective, we've got to really think through that.
Cool. We're at 0, gentlemen. So thank you very much for an engaging conversation. Pretty fun.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.